Hey everybody, it's writer-director Len Kapuscinski of Killer Wolf Films welcoming you to a brand new episode. It was going to be a Forgotten Movie Den episode where I bring in Joe from Ozone Late Night and we bring some movies to your attention that maybe you haven't heard of before and check them out and have fun with them, right? That's not going to happen tonight. It was going to, and then something happened, which was the death of Roger Corman. So, which we've probably done his movies or movies that he's produced and things on the Forgotten Movie Den throughout the years, kind of thing. I'm sure we have at some point. You know, I've done a lot of these episodes and things even before YouTube had canceled. My previous channel, but I am on YouTube, and it's at The Real Len K. So go subscribe to the channel, and I thank you very much. Hopefully, you are watching the Forgotten Movie Den tonight, or this version of the Forgotten Movie Den tonight, on my Patreon. Patreon.com/KillerWolfFilms. It's the very best way to support my works, past, present, future. It's not Tubi, it's not Amazon, it's not any of those places, although thank you very much if you watch my work on those places. But the best way to support my works, Patreon.com/KillerWolfFilms. All my movies are on there. Fist of the Vampire just went up on a 4K upscale May 1st, so that is up there right now. So I hope you go check it out. But as I said, tonight's going to be a special episode. Kind of, if we tried to highlight all the stuff we loved of Roger Corman, we'd be here for days and weeks and months trying to do that. Hundreds and thousands of films that he produced and stuff. So we're not just going to pick films of his to talk about, although I'm sure we'll highlight some specific things, specific movies that either he directed, produced. But it's going to kind of just a fun, laid-back episode tonight, special episode with me and Joe from Ozone Late Night, who I'm going to welcome in right now. As promised, I now welcome in the one and only Joe from Ozone Late Night. Joe, how are we doing this evening?
Well, I'm doing very well. It's sort of a bittersweet episode we're doing here because we're celebrating one of the giants of independent cinema who... I mean, you'll have lots more to say about this as a filmmaker, but anybody who appreciates B-movies or films in general, this is a giant that we've lost. So it's great to celebrate him, but it sucks. I mean, he made it to 98, so it's a long life, but still, you hate to see people like this go away because they're such a large presence. But I'm doing well, and I'm happy to talk about Roger Corman, who I think we both greatly appreciate.
Oh, yes, very, very, very much so. It would be impossible to highlight all the films I love from this man that he's produced and things. And we'll get into, acting, directing, all this kind of stuff because he's touched base on everything. The start, I think, is relatively kind of well-known in terms of the launching pad he gave people like James Cameron and things like that. But yeah, to jump right in, I think the thing that sticks out to me, and we can say, just kind of, I already warned the viewers, this is going to be really informal how we're doing things tonight because it's such a massive library of works from this man. I mean, where do you start? You know what I mean? But I think for me, where I would start is kind of I'm an 80s kid, but I was born in the 70s. And, when we get into those exploitation pictures and things, I really think of him first. And one of those things, and this is the first film I'll really highlight that I think is still probably my favorite Roger Corman picture, and he does not direct it. He had a hand in producing. He worked with David Carradine several times throughout his long career. But one of the beginning of his collaborations with the late David Carradine as well is none other than the Paul Bartel directed film in 1975 called Death Race 2000, which I think is an absolutely monumental piece of cinema, Joe.
Oh yeah, I mean this is one of the classics. I mean, Death Race is. I mean, it's been remade, twice now, I think? The latest one was the Jason Statham vehicle, maybe? There might be one after that. But none of them compare to the original. It is such a landmark of magnificent filmmaking. Death Race is... it's such a great movie. Yeah, but you can't possibly talk about Corman without talking about it.
Yeah, I mean, this kind of film, in my opinion, needs its own episode, actually. I could talk about this one for a while, because I think one of the things that was really rather unique, and, these films for Roger Corman, we're talking 1975, these are going to the drive-in. These are going to the cinemas and stuff like that. These aren't, a lot of his New Horizon offerings that came in the 80s and things and into the 90s where it was, meant to be straight to Cinemax or, straight to the home, video stores and stuff. These were theatrical releases back then. David Carradine was a hot name at the time, coming off of the Kung Fu TV series. He was out to bury his Kane character. He didn't want to be cast as Kane in everything he did, but that was his thing. He wanted to do something wildly different, and Death Race 2000 is the opposite end of the spectrum for that. But I think anytime you hear, oh, somebody's getting run over for points, or if you run over, it started here, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you can see the influence of this movie through the Grand Theft Auto series, through like games like Carmageddon, everywhere. This is the thing about Corman that I don't know that everybody, I mean, people like us know, but the larger filmmaking public, people who enjoy films, probably don't have any understanding of how far Corman's influence has seeped in terms of the opportunities, the films that he made. He is every bit as important to filmmaking as somebody like Steven Spielberg, as, the best, whoever your favorite soundtrack person is, all these people. He is every bit as vital. And things like Death Race, you see that influence everywhere. I mean, George Miller, the Mad Max films, it's everywhere. And it's just, I think, Death Race is so good. Yeah, we could do a whole episode on it.
In terms of David Carradine for his acting and stuff, I'd have to go with Bound for Glory as his pinnacle, his top achievement in acting probably, which he made only maybe 3 years after Death Race 2000. But Bound for Glory is a wonderful film. But back to Death Race 2000, I think that was another thing too, where how do you market it? The marketing for this film is that it's an exploitation film. You can't market it as just an action film or a horror film or a science fiction film, or it's an exploitation film with all those kinds of things in it. Sylvester Stallone, obviously, it's one of his first, you could say he's starring in this film, not the lead, obviously, that's Carradine, but and Simone Griffin, I believe, is the female in this film. They would be your leads, but Stallone has a strong starring role as Machine Gun Joe in this film, and he has, gets to flex some comedy muscles there, but part of that, I'm sure, was Mr. Bartel's writing and directing, but and not to keep going on Death Race 2000, but that was the first film for Corman that really, really hit me hard, and I thought, man, I just love this stuff. But Joe, you talk about Corman and what brought you in and things you enjoyed. What's something that just jumps off to the top of your head about Roger Corman?
Well, and it's one of his early films, and actually two of the films I want to talk about are ones he directed, and this one's from '59, and it's called A Bucket of Blood. And the reason that I know about it is because I remember when I was young and I saw Dick Miller in Gremlins, I immediately thought, oh, this is such an interesting person. Even before I was really into film or anything, I just thought he was such a kind of off-kilter side character. And so somebody had said that I think was way more into movies than I was at that time. It's like, oh, you got to watch this early one, man, where he's killing people. It's like an accidental comedy thing. And I'm like, really? Okay, sure, I'll watch it. Because I'm like, oh, it's black and white, but whatever, I'll watch it. And I saw Bucket of Blood. And I don't think I even put together, I didn't really know Corman's name at that point, but I watched that and I went, wow, this is really different than most of the stuff. Because, of course, I was going to the movie theaters like most people when I was in my teen years, and this stuff wasn't playing there, not the big theaters where I was. But this was one of the early things that got me clued in. Oh, there's a whole different type of film that people are making. This isn't, the big blockbuster stuff, your Jaws, Star Wars, all the rest of it. This is a really weird and kind of offbeat little movie centered around this guy who, again, I saw him and I'm like, wow, he's so much younger in this because, no kidding he is. But I watched it, I was just riveted by it, and that was one of my early B-movie experiences, and it's stuck with me forever. It just happens to be one that he actually did direct, and it's got Dick Miller, who went on to be name-checked in this role in numerous other B films, and is a great, again, character actor. That's something else that's a hallmark of these films, is they don't often get the big stars sometimes, but then you get these people who consistently work, and they do great work, and then they show up in bigger pictures, not in the lead roles. But then when you see them in these, sometimes they are in those lead roles, and they're really great. Yeah,
I would agree 100%. I think anybody that is more of a newer person into, horror genre, or especially horror, because I think Dick Miller kind of gravitated to that, probably more so than any other genre. I know he did other works, but I think Bucket of Blood, I had saw it many, many years ago. I would have saw it in the early 80s on a local television show or a program in Erie, Pennsylvania, where I live, called The Late Great Horror Show. And they played Godzilla movies and all kinds of Man with Two Brains and, all this kind of thing. And Bucket of Blood was obviously one of those pictures, the Wax Museum film, all that kind of stuff were on there. So I saw these films when I was, 8, 9 years old. But back then, horror wasn't the envelope pushing thing where you're rated R and all this kind of stuff. Back then, Bucket of Blood is probably a PG movie at the time, if there was even an MPA rating on that. But, Corman's somebody that can produce produce and direct and span a genre where 1 minute he could be on Turner Classic Movies and the next minute he's on Cinemax at late night show.
Well, and that's it's funny you say that, because the only reason that Bucket of Blood was in the local video store, which is where I found it, that was near where I lived, is because the owner was buying black and white films and putting them in the classic section without knowing what they were. Because I knew a couple people who worked there, and they said, yeah, he doesn't know what he's putting here. He's got movies in here that shouldn't be in, where children can watch them, because he just didn't know what they were. And Bucket of Blood was in the classic. I mean, it was before Casablanca, because it was alphabetical. So it was 1 or 2 tapes down, and these were all grouped together, and I'm sitting here going, now that I know better later, I'm like, man, talk about putting 2 movies near each other that could not be more worlds apart. But that's the only reason I was able to see it, because I had a local video store, as a lot of us did of a certain age when we were younger, and a lot of times the owners didn't necessarily know what they were buying. They were just buying things and throwing them on the shelves. But that worked out, because I got to see this. There would be no other way. There were no streaming services. They weren't the Vinegar Syndrome and Severin. These things didn't exist when I was younger. So this was an accident, and I happened to see it, and it was great. And I got exposed to it really early, and I'm glad I did.
Yeah, I think going forward, and again, my next kind of pick here to talk about is something else where, and I realize, I know you've picked films that he's directed, so I've stuck in the producing realm for where I feel, obviously, he's done a way more producing efforts than directing and acting efforts, but the next one I want to mention is an 80s, and I would say it defines the 80s for horror and science fiction in a way. Just a lot of excess in it and things like that. And it's none other than Chopping Mall, directed by Jim Wynorski. And this one, again, I think when you think cult movies in the 80s, this has got to be in your top 5 probably. With strange, I would love to know if Roger Corman had his hands in some of the advertising campaigns, because some of the posters and stuff make no sense that it would be like a killer robot in a mall movie. I forget, there's like a cut off hand holding a shopping bag, that iconic, I think that was the video and movie, theatrical release poster, but that has nothing to do with the film. And then we could talk a long way on that kind of promotion stuff, but to stick to the track with Chopping Mall, I think that's the definition of 80s horror kind of thing. It's a wonderfully fun, crazy movie with a great head explosion, right up there with Deadly Friend. But Joe, have you seen Chopping Mall?
Well, here again, this is another one that was in the video store. Now, this one was properly classified as a horror film, but I remember seeing the cover art, and this is a VHS thing that, a lot of people who remember VHS, this is what they did. I remember very distinctly, I saw this robotic hand, which does not appear in the film, holding a bag of body parts, and I went, whoa. I need to see this, and then watched it, and I was a little disappointed that robot did not appear at all. The robots were decidedly unhuman. They were basically large, kind of rolling, ridiculous-looking robots. But it was a blast, because it was death in a shopping mall, and so that part delivered. It was a mall of death, and so I got suckered in and watched it and loved it. And again, it was another one of these things where video stores, that marketing worked perfectly, because I don't think I would have picked it up otherwise, but that artwork was so striking. And then the movie was a lot of fun. Was it the best horror movie I've ever seen? An Exorcist level movie? No, not in terms of filmmaking, but was it a blast? Yeah, it was. So I got something with great art, and it ended up being a fun time. So yeah, Chopping Mall, I own it on Blu-ray. It's fantastic.
If you have the Blu-ray for it, do you know, is there like a Wynorski commentary on that by chance or anything? I'd be interested in grabbing that if it had, some behind-the-scenes stuff or a commentary track. I'll have to look it up. I'd love to know about the advertising campaign for the movie, because when you think about it, Joe, with that awesome, almost zombie, robotic-looking hand with with the shopping bag of body parts on the poster, which is, I think, an iconic poster. It's right up there with like House and things like that. Yeah, but I mean, you really can't put the robots in the movie on the poster, because then no one's going to rent it, Joe.
Right, of course, right. No, absolutely. No, again, it is, but this was a thing with VHS, is there was a lot of deceptive advertising, and the nice part is the artwork's beautiful, which it is, but Yeah, you often did not get what was promised. I mean, there are many, many examples of, wow, look at that giant monster that the fantasy hero will be fighting. And then you get into the movie and it's a rubber faced guy who might lift, I guess, at the gym. And that's as big as he gets. And that's it. But that's, you know what? That became the beauty of it. It was almost rolling the dice. You know, will this be anything like the cover looks? You don't know till you watch it. And that's kind of the fun. It's like a mystery box. So I didn't really care about it. It didn't bother me all that much. So it's a lot of fun.
Joe, into your next pick of something you're discussing with Roger Corman. What is it?
Well, my next one is a production one, and that is Rock and Roll High School, which this one is, I'm a huge Ramones fan. Having been born and raised in New York, that was a band I was exposed to very early, and I've always adored them. The essence of low-budget punk attitude, which fits right in with the Corman aesthetic where, you know, we're just going to do it and we're just going to have a lot of fun with it and not worry about whether it's up to the standards of whatever. That was the Ramones' whole thing. And to have a whole movie that was largely centered around them, as far as the main character being the super fan, and to have the music and just the whole concept of a movie built around the Ramones as a band. I love this one the minute I saw it, and I've loved it, and I've watched it like every couple of years. I'll pull this one out and watch it and just enjoy it from beginning to end. It's a masterpiece.
Yeah, I agree 100% on this. And I'm an old school punk rocker. I've seen the Misfits probably 20 times in concert, that kind of stuff. I love the Ramones. You know, this is one, again, when you watch something like this, don't you feel like this is what Troma really should have been? Or it's almost like a better Troma. I mean, because that's the feeling I get. When Troma came around and I go back and I watch something like Rock and Roll High School, it's like, why didn't Troma do this? Or, you know, because the punk rock attitude's there, that rebel spirit, all that stuff is there. And then Troma after, you know, we hit some ones that we like, the original Toxic Avenger and those kinds of things. Stuff like Combat Shock, which is still the most depressing, downtrodden, bleak, nihilistic movie I've ever seen in my life. You should see it, but I've warned you. In Combat Shock. But yeah, this feels like a better Troma movie, Joe.
Oh, no, I completely agree. This is, you know, I agree. We have a very hit or miss attitude when it comes to Troma. You know, they have their good stuff and they have a lot of awful stuff. But yes, this feels like what Troma is often marketing themselves as. Oh, all of our movies are this. And sometimes they get close. A lot of times they don't. But this would be, if somebody were to say, well, what do you think Troma wants to be? Yeah, this would be it. You'd say, watch this. This is what they want to be in everything they do. They just don't often hit it.
Yeah, and I think this one too. I mean, you're never going to see music like that in Troma films. I mean, the Ramones. I mean, hello. But you know, and then you know, 10 years later, we get AC/DC with Maximum Overdrive, a Stephen King movie, who's also a huge fan of the Ramones. But obviously, they sing the ending song in the original Pet Sematary. But I could go on and on about those kinds of connections. But yeah, this is a good one, Joe. And I think that was a very short-lived, you can say that's a genre, right? The high school, what do you want to call it? High school punk movie or high school, yeah, I don't even know what to call that genre, Joe.
Yeah, I mean, you'd almost call it, yeah, rock and roll fan films or something. I'm not sure what the genre would be, but you're right. It was this little kind of micro blink of a trend, and I don't really know why we haven't seen more of it. It seems like something that would happen more often, but no, it didn't last very long. And you know what? Maybe that's for the better. Maybe it would have just been disintegrated. Maybe it would have gotten overproduced and we'd have NSYNC built movies that we'd just be miserable and vomiting over. So maybe it's good that it burned out quick, because I'd rather have just a couple of Rock and Roll High School types than an entire industry built around the Backstreet Boys having a fan movie. So maybe we're better off. Maybe the timeline worked out the way it was supposed to.
Yeah, and this kind of segues into my next thing I'd talk about that he had a hand in producing, and it ended up being a series of films. And this is one of those moments we mentioned before. He can do the New Horizons, and I just use that as an example because that's when he really started kicking everything straight to home video for the most part. But occasionally, there is that film that he produces, probably thinking he's going to go straight to video, but then something happens and somebody like Universal gives him an offer to release it. And this is one of those cases, even though it was not a box office success. I'm sure he thought, I'm going to put this in home video, but then Universal steps in and says, here, Roger, here's some money. He's profited already, and then he goes on and he produces other ones. But I'm talking about The Watchers, the Dean Koontz novel that Corman acquires or gets rights to make Watchers. He kicks it off to Universal, and they release the first one, only the first one, because then when they released it, it made no money. They said, well, shit, we're out. So Roger's like, well, I still have this series, and he goes on to make part 2 with Mark Singer. And then the third one, I forget who's in the third one, but the fourth one, one of them is with Wings Hauser. That's a Predator ripoff. That's, I think, really fun. It might be my favorite Watchers film is the Predator ripoff one with Wings Hauser. And Wings is going for it in it too. So I mean, when does he not? But yeah, I think The Watchers is a fun series as well. And I only highlight it because those are one of those instances where we create a film, we think it's going to be just this small thing that we're going to turn a profit on, but we're going to do it to home video. But oh wait, a big guy's offering me money for this. Let me do that, and then he gets it back and goes and makes more B movies off of it, Joe.
Yeah, I think the Watchers films are all really fun. I like them. You know, I'm a Mark Singer fan. I think when Wings Hauser is trying too hard, he's actually better than when he's trying to dial it back. So I'm a fan of drunk off his rocker and going crazy Wings Hauser. I'll take that in any film. It's always entertaining, if nothing else. And I think Mark Singer is one of those people who is, again, a landmark of B movies where you see him and he's usually pretty reliable. You know, you see him trying to do good work, and I generally like stuff I see him in, or I'm at least entertained by him. Oh, yeah. So yeah, I like the Watchers films. I haven't watched them in a long time, but I remember being really, really a big fan of them, and I probably should go back and revisit them.
Yeah, I had met Mark Singer maybe 20 years ago, maybe a little less than that, but around there at a convention in Cleveland, and I forget which one it was, Fright Vision or something there, but he was there. And I got to talk to him for a few minutes as it wasn't a busy day at that convention at the time. But yeah, he's a big dude. So, we got to talking about Beastmaster and things like that. I actually had him sign my poster that he is the villain in a movie called The Fighter with Olivier Gruner from Nemesis. I had him sign that poster. He's the big villain in the film. It's obviously a martial art picture. But yeah, Singer's always dependable. I had saw he's back in acting now. Because it seems like he kind of left. I know his wife passed away maybe 10 years ago, and then it looked like, he was done kind of thing with acting. But I saw, just like 2 days ago, Joe, it's funny we bring this up now, I just saw this. They released a trailer. Apparently Chuck Norris has made a new action picture, and Mark Singer is like co-billed with him.
Oh, interesting. Well, you know what? That doesn't really surprise me, because I think now that...
The name is...
now that we're seeing... yeah, I saw an image of it too, and I can't remember what it's called either, but I remember I saw the poster had Chuck Norris on it, so that's what caught my eye, because I went, oh, okay, a new Chuck Norris film. But yeah, I think there is a renewed interest in people who did these kind of movies, because I think with, again, Severin, Vinegar Syndrome, and some other things, they're seeing there's still money in this. And so there are bankable people who may never have been A-listers per se, but they can still pull in an audience. They can do good traction on video and streaming services. So yeah, I think we're going to see more of this, and I'm glad to see it.
Yeah, and that's why I bring Watchers out is one of those, and I've got another series I'm going to bring up in a minute here. But I think that's one thing Corman, he did everything good, everything well. But he would latch on to a title, and he would milk it until it was done kind of thing. If he felt he could get sequels out of Watchers or Bloodfist or Terror Within, which is the DVD sitting right in front of us in this podcast tonight in my Roger Corman Presents DVD collection. The Terror Within with Andrew Stevens there. Great rubber monster movie. I love it to death. I've seen it probably 10 times. But, he would drag those titles until he just knew he could not make a profit out of them anymore, and then they were done.
I do think that is one of the things that is most remarkable about the way he approached the industry is, he was going to make sure that there was not a dime left in whatever he was doing before he would let something go, which I don't think a lot of the industry doesn't look at it that way. They're looking at it as, well, if I don't make $500 billion on this thing, then we're going to drop it, even if it made some money and we know there's quality in it. Whereas Corman's approach was, okay, I spent money on this, and until I know that I'm losing money on it, we're going to keep going. And I think that is one of the not every movie he was involved with was a hit, but I think there's a lot of titles in his catalog that you can easily see that had he not had it, it would never have been made. It would never have been touched. It would never have been looked at. But because he saw some potential and didn't necessarily say, well, we have to spend $50 million on it. We're going to have to make it a different way. We still get these films. We still get these stories. We still have people who probably would not have had any film type of career at all, but for the fact that Corman took a chance on them.
Yeah, and one of the things, and back then too, we're talking about, when he's talking about not losing a dime on these pictures and stuff, these are still, mid six-figure pictures and stuff like that. When we talk about stuff like The Terror Within, which had sequels, I think 3 of them, or Watchers and things like that. These are, we think of low-budget cinema today as, what we get flooded with in the micro-budget, because I live in it, believe me, the micro-budget, indie-scape there. And, you're talking about this guy's got a shoot on film. They're producing, using real sets, most of his stuff. It's amazing how he could do it with titles like that. And, he profited enough till it was done and he moved on. So, today, because of micro budget taking over what people think low budget is, I mean, do you think there'd ever be a Terror Within 1, 2, 3 like today? I doubt it, Joe.
No, and that's what I mean about the industry is so fundamentally changed that these movies would not have existed and could not exist today.
No.
Corman basically is responsible for a lot of things that we would never have otherwise seen. I mean, we just know that. We know that from the way that movie making generally works, and he was an exception within it because, and a lot of it, let's be honest, was financial. He knew he was trying to drive towards making a profit, but that the way he viewed making movies allowed him to have a different way of approaching it where it wasn't all just, I have to make sure everybody is a bankable name and I have to make sure that everything makes 15 times what I put in. If it makes a profit and it's a good time and it leads to the next thing, let's make it.
Right.
And that type of attitude is almost destroyed now. It's almost just non-existent.
I get that.
And you're right. And Joe, going into your next highlight, what do you got?
Well, this was actually Corman's final direction where he actually directed a film. It's an oddball type of film called Frankenstein Unbound. And I came across this very randomly. And it just so happened it was the last movie that he directed. And it was based on a book, which I read, which is bonkers, by the way. And the same author did a book about a time-traveling Count Dracula who has his own train that he drives through time. It is psychotic. It's great. Frankenstein Unbound is a weird little film about a time-traveling guy who goes back and meets Victor Frankenstein, who is, in reality, he exists and has created a monster, and then it ends up with this apocalyptic ending. It's worth seeing, not only because I think it is well made. I mean, Corman knew what he was doing, but I also think it's a really fascinating film. I'm not going to tell you that it's necessarily a great unknown gem of Frankenstein filmography, but it kind of is. The monster is weird looking and different, acts differently. There's a lot about it that feels unique. And so I don't, and it's the only problem with it is it's very hard to find. It has no official release. You can find it on YouTube fairly easily. And I think a couple of services might have it now. But I would say seek it out. Number one, because it is Corman's last directed movie, but also because I think it's worth seeing. And it's something a little different. It's getting into his horror roots, but it's also got this time travel element, so there's some sci-fi in there. And even having not directed in, I think, 10 to 15 years when this movie was made, it still shows he still had it and he could still make an entertaining movie that was relatively low budget, but has John Hurt in the lead, who's great. And I just think more people should know about the film. I think because it's hard to find, it gets forgotten very easily, and it should be seen.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a very interestingly bizarre mix and match of different things. And we mentioned that when we talked about Death Race 2000 a little bit ago, and I think Frankenstein Unbound has a little bit of that. And I knew that was his last one he directed. I'd be curious, because I don't know this off the top of my head, but I mentioned it a minute ago in Watchers, where he kicked it off to Universal. Do you know who released this film? I think it might have been a bigger company. Like, I'm sure he had plans to just do it through New Horizons or whatever, but I thought somebody else released this one.
Yeah, this is a 20th Century Fox, distributed by 20th Century.
So that was a perfect segue from Watchers, pretty much. But yeah, another example. He kicks it up to a big company kind of thing. So especially with John Hurt and those kinds of things, you're not going to find John Hurt in The Terror Within. You know what I mean? So
and not John Hurt sleepwalking through it. He is acting. That's another thing. Is I feel like Corman, unlike some other people, was respected and was respectful of the actors and wasn't playing it for cheap and just to say, well, whatever, you're just a name, so don't worry about getting it right. We don't care. I don't feel like that was ever what was involved with his stuff. It always was, let's try to make this as good as we can and not make it where people will look at it and say it's crap. Because I think Corman was intelligent and knew that if the films start getting a reputation of just being cheap junk, then nobody's going to bother. Whereas if they seem better than they should be, then people will keep coming back. And I think that's what he did very well.
Yeah, Joe, you mentioned that, where if people start believing it's cheap junk, they stop. What company does that sound like? I mean, that's what Troma became, Joe.
I was going to say, I think we were just talking about them, but I'll let the audience figure it out. Yeah, no big mystery there.
In my opinion, that's what Troma became. And I've met Lloyd several times. He's funny and, he's great. But, it's a unique film. I'm really surprised, Joe, and you mentioned these guys like Vinegar Syndrome and why they're not jumping on this film. I have no idea because, who knows now that he's dead. Something's got to happen. We'll make it happen when he's dead.
Well, if I had to guess, it might be because 20th Century is involved. Maybe there's more to it because it's a bigger distributor.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, and I doubt they're getting ready to do a 4K release. We're not going to get off on this tangent, but this is what pisses me off about these bigger distributors is they're holding stuff that they're never going to do anything with because they don't look at it as a film anybody could possibly want. Whereas, obviously, there are audiences for these things. So just let people, you don't want to make a 4K Blu-ray, don't. Let somebody else do it. At least people could see this stuff.
Right, let someone else do it. Right, if it's going to sit there in a can somewhere in a warehouse, just let somebody else do it. I've seen what happens when people care about movies that they find in cans, and that's how we got New York Ninja recently. So, there's Exhibit A.
Miami really. Connection. I mean, yeah, we're going to keep seeing that too. There's lots of that. We know there's lots of this stuff sitting around that people will watch and will buy. I mean, Vinegar Syndrome, Severin, we can name these companies. I buy stuff from these people like every other month. So clearly there's money in it. Yeah. Going into the next thing for me, I think Roger Corman was always good about realizing if he knew a giant movie that was going to be big with Spielberg and dinosaurs was going to come out and it wasn't quite out yet, he was going to try to hit the video stores and produce something quickly that could capitalize on perhaps a Jurassic Park name the film, name a big film, and he's just going to make a kind of not a rip-off version of it, because I think in the film I'm going to kind of mention next, there was a lot of effort and caring involved in this picture with a wacky performance by Diane Ladd. I'm talking about Carnosaur, kind of capitalizing on the whole Jurassic Park boom. I think we can call Jurassic Park a boom that was happening. So he comes out with Carnosaur, shoots it in a couple weeks, which was always kind of his thing, in and out 2-3 weeks max, and you're done. Process it through editing as fast as we can, make it look good, but be super quick about it because we want to get it on video store shelves through New Horizons or whatever Carnosaur went through. And but yeah, Carnosaur limited theatrical release, but I think that's an example of how he was always had his pulse on something that he thought was going to be really big coming out, and he goes for it and makes his own kind of play on that kind of thing, Joe. Well, and this is also a point in time where, and again, younger people, and this is not an insult, I'm just saying that when you're younger, you don't understand what this was. Right. When movies would come out, when we were younger, they were not going to get into a video store until, a year later in some cases? I mean, it was a long time. So if you could get a video cassette on a shelf that looked like something that was popular in the theaters, you were going to get rentals. You were going to sell those units because people would say, oh man, that was a great dinosaur movie. Now I want to watch another dinosaur movie. And they would see Carnosaur and think, oh, okay, this might be something similar. They're not expecting it to be Jurassic Park, but they're in the mood to watch that again. And they will rent it. And then you can make multiple films in that series, and they will be ahead of, depending on how quickly you make them, which again, as you said, Corman was good at this. You make them fast enough, you could knock out 2 or 3 of those movies before the first Jurassic Park is even out on home video. And you can score, which is, I think, what happened. Because if that first one hadn't done some kind of business, would there have been a 2 or 3? I don't think so. Corman didn't do that. So
not for Corman.
Yeah.
But yeah, and you mentioned that you get it to the video stores. Maybe, like I said, I believe Carnosaur had like a limited, like L.A., New York release kind of thing. Maybe Chicago. Regardless, it's going to find its real home is in the video store. And you talk about it. Let's say you sell 10,000 units of Carnosaur, VHSs at the time kind of thing. Well, those VHS, what were they, like 89.99 back then? I mean, they were not cheap to get it into your video store. You're talking $90.
Oh yeah, that's what I'm saying is you don't have to do business for long. You just have to do a lot of it. And once you make a profit off it, and that again, this is the Corman formula, which obviously worked very well for him. He knew what he was doing. Is okay, how do we squeeze all the money out of this? And it doesn't mean that these movies are going to go down as landmark filmmaking achievements, but generally, more times than not, they were a lot of fun. And people grabbed them because they either echoed something that was in theaters or was very popular, or, like in Chopping Mall's case, they have dynamite artwork, and then you watch it and you realize, okay, this is actually a fun time. And that's what I mean about some of the things I like about, and that we don't have anymore really, about VHS stores and the artwork is it could get you, by being misdirected by a little bit of deception, to try out something that you might not have expected to like as much as you did. That was the fun of a video store experience, is to go in and let's say you saw Carnosaur, you might even think, okay, this is probably not going to be a good movie, but it looks funny. Let's watch it. And then you're like, oh, okay, this is not, again, a $5 movie made with no effort. They're trying to make a echo of a bigger type of story. They're making their own dinosaur movie, and it's a lot of fun. And then you watch the next one, and that's how you build a fan base.
Yeah, I highly recommend checking out Carnosaur, people. It is a fun movie. I think it's a blast. You mentioned like something like Frankenstein Unbound, where John Hurt's going for it kind of thing. I think Diane Ladd is going for it in her Carnosaur performance. It's crazy. See Carnosaur, people. You'll have a lot of fun. Have some drinks. Bring your friends over. Have a blast with Carnosaur. But yeah, and I think the last take I'll just say off of something like Carnosaur is, we mentioned the Italians doing this, with all their post-apocalyptic Mad Max takes and those kinds of things. But in America, that wasn't super popular. You know what I'm saying? I think we can agree on that, But I think when Corman does it now, now people are now you have their ear. Roger Corman's doing this stuff, and he was the Asylum before the Asylum was the Asylum. Does that make sense?
No, I completely agree, except the one thing with Asylum is sometimes, as we've talked about with like Trauma, I feel like a lot of times Asylum isn't really doing it with sincerity. They're doing it in the Italian style sometimes of, okay, we're just going to cash in. Whereas I really don't ever feel like that was Corman's trademark. It wasn't, I'm just cashing in on something on the cheap. It was more of, I know that a way to make an economical version of something like this and still have it be entertaining, turn a profit, and, let people be able to have a chance in this industry there was some quote that I think is one of the best quotes that is about Corman, where he said something about, I tell people who work for me, I want you to go and make a film so good you don't ever have to work for me again. And I think that ethos, because it never felt like Corman was an ego person. He knew how to make money. He wanted to make money. He knew what the industry was, but it never felt like he was saying, I have to be the most important person in the room. Everybody has to know my name. Instead, he, I think, understood that if he built a group of people who would be appreciative of him, whether that's the viewers or the people working for him, that his name would be remembered. And it is remembered without all the ego that we often see in this industry.
Yeah, obviously, because so many people came and usually we get it, you're coming for a paycheck kind of thing, but even that ran out of steam with a lot of big actors. These big actors that did that ran out of steam. They would go back to Corman. You know what I mean? I look at something towards the tail end of like Bruce Willis's career and things like that, when he's in all of that junk, and we know he's not healthy and kind of things like that. But if you would have rewound that to 20 or 30 years ago, you would have had him hit his popularity, do some films, stay popular a little bit, but then boom, he'd go right back to somebody like Roger Corman, then he'd make 10 more movies with him kind of thing. So, I think there has to be some truth with that. I mean, we mentioned somebody like David Carradine, and we know the problems he had and stuff like that, but, even he worked many, 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 many times with him, and I could name several other actors and stuff off of it, but you get what I'm saying. There's definitely some truth to what you're saying, or those kinds of things don't happen.
Yeah, I mean, we know many stories of people who, again, are somebody like James Cameron is a good example. Great filmmaker, but also big ego. You will not have any trouble finding stories about people who are like, yeah, he is not the easiest person to work with. And you know what they mean when they're saying that. Whereas Corman, yeah, Corman always, he could call in favors and it never felt like he was pressuring anybody. You know, people would appear. Again, they always did good work too. I mean, the ones who could do good work always did. That's another thing. If it's somebody who's got something on you and that's why you're working for them, we can generally tell. You don't get the best work out of them, you know? And that wasn't Corman's thing. He just knew how to make, again, economical was always the word I think of with him is, you know, he knew how to avoid wasting money. There's something the larger industry could learn about. He could avoid wasting money and yet still retain enough that he knew that people would be entertained by what he was making. And in the end, that's what it should be. If you could do it that way, do it that way.
Yeah, and I forget what director it was. I think it was Kat Shea from Strip to Kill, which I think is one of my favorite produced Corman films in the 80s there with Greg Evigan and the woman from the horror film Headhunter, Kay Lenz from Death Wish 4 and stuff. I love Strip to Kill. And I was going to briefly mention that later here in a second, but I think she had an interview or a meeting with Roger Corman about it, and they were going to use the strip club and something like that, but then she wanted it marketed this way or wanted to shoot something, and she said, well, I went in with a plan to say, Roger, we've got this strip club location for 8 days or whatever, and then, but we're going to do this and do it this way, or maybe, you know, there wasn't enough nudity or something was going on. And she said, well, Roger Corman turned every shade of purple, but then when we smoothed it out, he said yes. And so Strip to Kill got made kind of thing. So yeah, I think he knew what these films had to have to turn their profit. Obviously, somebody like that knows what they're doing. So if there wasn't X amount of nudity or violence or gore or monsters on camera, all that kind of stuff, he knew what it took and knew what the fans wanted to see because the fans kept coming back. I'm one of them. So, you know, I think that's a fun story. I mean, he knew what the audience wanted, I think, out of stuff.
Yeah, he did know how to prioritize what was important. And because when I was very young, I remember I didn't realize this when I was younger. And as I got older, I was like, oh, okay, I see what this is. Because I remember watching Battle Beyond the Stars when I was very young. Again, before I knew anything about how movies were made or anything about the, you know, behind the scenes stuff. And then I saw Space Raiders, you know, probably, you know, whenever those came out, they were running on Cinemax or Showtime or whatever. Yeah. And I remember, I'm like, oh, that's the same spaceship, except it's flips upside down. I guess these must be in the same universe, or they just made a bunch of these ships. Of course, later then I realized what he was doing was reusing the ship models and the footage and stuff. But does it make it that I can't watch it now because I know that? No, it makes me appreciate the fact that he recognized, hey, I have a good model and this is a neat looking ship. Why would I not use this again? It's you know, if George Lucas reused the Millennium Falcon in another movie, I wouldn't care because I'm like, yeah, that's a great ship design, man. Stick with it. Why wouldn't you reuse that thing? So these are all the things that once you get into film and if you have an appreciation for the craft of it and how it's made, it just broadens the respect you have for Corman, because it never became, we're reusing this because it's cheap, even though we know it's going to ruin the film. It was, no, this is something we can use. It means that I can pay a person more, or I can get a bigger star, or I can afford better music. So why wouldn't I just reuse this and save that money and apply it to make a different part of the film better? Why rebuild a ship model when the one I've got will work fine and nobody will care because it doesn't impact the film? Those are smart decisions. Again, something the larger industry might want to start paying attention to is what things matter and what things don't. That's one of the things. I as time has gone on, the more I've gotten into the background of how film's made, of course I'm not a filmmaker or anything, but just as a fan of it, of the trivia stuff, my appreciation for Corman and my respect for what he did and what he contributed has only ever increased. And that's what I mean about it sucks that somebody like this is gone, and I don't know that we have a successor to him because the industry just doesn't work this way. And it's a shame. That's the biggest thing, is Corman's absence is a shame.
Yeah, and as to quote Ric Flair, what he said when I believe Mean Gene Okerlund had passed away, he said, rest easy knowing you can never be replaced. And I think obviously Roger Corman is that. But is there anything else you'd want to highlight, Joe, as we're kind of winding down the episode?
I would just encourage people, because I don't think many people are aware of how many things Corman was involved with. But if you go, the Wikipedia page for him is just It is a watch list of things you should see. That's the easiest thing. There's lots of, best of this, best of that, whatever. Just go look up Roger Corman on Wikipedia and look through the filmography and just start clicking on titles, and anything that sounds remotely interesting, watch it, because you're probably going to have a good time. Or watch them all if you want to. There's a lot. You're going to be spending a lot of time doing that. But I find that his stuff, I can't even come up with a Corman film that I was seriously disappointed in. I mean, some are better than others, just like anything, but I can't sit here and think, oh yeah, that was the one Roger Corman stinker of the bunch. I can't come up with one. Maybe it's because I haven't seen it yet. I'm sure they're not all great, but most of the ones I was interested in, when I watched them, I came to the end of them and I was entertained. And that would be my recommendation. Go there and start clicking on films and start watching the ones that are interesting, because you will probably come away a fan if you never were before.
That's an excellent quote, Joe. One series I would be remiss if I didn't mention, because everybody knows me as a karate guy. And I mentioned previously that, Corman was the best at just milking a series, and then he knew when he was maybe close to not turning a profit, it was over, kind of thing. And this series was that, and it's a kickboxer. Jean-Claude Van Damme was just coming in with Bloodsport and Cyborg and Lionheart and those kinds of pictures. Roger Corman produced a film with a real-life kickboxing champion, maybe the greatest kickboxer that ever lived, in my opinion. I know, Lewis and those guys, but this guy had God gifts with KO power when he looks like he could be like a librarian, and that's Don the Dragon Wilson. And he went in with a series called Blood Fist, and follow Don Wilson on social media. He's a fascinating guy. He always has great stories he tells on his pages and things. And when Roger Corman died, that's really the first page I went to was Don the Dragon Wilson's, because I wanted to see what he said. And sure, there's a picture of Roger saying he's thanking him for giving him his shot, kind of thing. And we're talking about Blood Fist 1. Billy Blanks is in that, long before Tybo, long before Back in Action, and he did those films with Roddy Piper and things like that. Billy Blanks is in the film. I think the Blood Fist series, again, 3 being the best one, where he goes to prison, and it almost feels a little bit of originality creeping into that one a little bit, is the best one in the series, in my opinion. But I think Blood Fist went to like 7 or 8, and then finally they said, Roger, even Don Wilson had said that, Roger, I thought we exhausted it at that point. So then there was no more Blood Fist. But I think that was a really critical one, especially in this direct-to-video era. We're talking about that golden era of direct-to-video, which in my opinion is probably 1988 and 1989. Everybody's got their opinion there, but in my opinion, 88, 89 is a big boom for direct-to-video cinema. And Blood Fist was kind of leading that pack. And when you watch it, you're thinking, the acting's not super great in this, but this is kind of cool. There's some cool fight scenes in this, It looks like you could have watched it on the big screen kind of thing. But Blood Fist, I don't know if you've checked any of those out, Joe, but if I could leave you with a film to watch from Corman that you might not have, I would say Blood Fist 1 or Blood Fist 1, 2, or 3. Blood Fist 2 is kind of a take on Enter the Dragon. So, I mean, who doesn't like that? But 1, 2, and 3, I think are really, 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 really cool, like B martial arts cinema.
Well, I've seen the first one. I will now check out the sequels. I just never got around to them. But on your recommendation, yes, I'll watch 2 and 3. 1 is great. Oh, then I don't doubt it. This is one of these things where I realize now that again, this is the comparison, unlike in big industry where the sequels get worse right away, I find in B movies, the sequels tend to last for a while because, it's a different type of filmmaking. If I could mention one other one, just as one more recommendation, because I'm a big Hammer horror fan. I love those type of films. And another one that Corman directed is The Mask of the Red Death, one of my favorite people of horror, Vincent Price. It's a magnificent movie. So I probably should have put that on my main list, but I was holding it to 3. But just as a last minute mention, Mask of the Red Death, vintage Vincent Price. If you're a Vincent Price fan, it's great. It's a wonderful film.
Again, another one I would have watched 40 years ago on the Late Great Horror Show in my area, kind of thing. Mask of Red Death, Bucket of Blood, all that stuff. I'd like to close with this kind of thought, I guess. I think one of the biggest things, and I mean, I don't even know how you can say biggest. I mean, he's done so much. But to me, one of the biggest things that Roger also did was he gave opportunities to female directors and writers and things like that. And I think that was kind of ahead of its time. Kind of thing. And we're talking back into the 80s. I mean, he let females head films that could be potential franchises. We're talking about what it was, Sorority House Massacre, directed by a woman. Humanoids from the Deep, directed by a woman. Strip to Kill, which we mentioned, but yeah, see Strip to Kill. It's a legit good movie. It falls under exploitation cinema, sure, but I think you'll get more out of it than that. Strip to Kill is a really cool movie, directed by Kat Shea, female. So, he gave a lot of opportunities when those things weren't really a super big thing back then, Joe.
No, I actually could not agree more. When most of the stories we hear about people who have influence and power in the film industry are horrible and they make you just want to be sick, he is a person who I have not heard any terrible stories about. Everything I hear about him is he always was an empowering influence to whoever he encountered. He wanted people to be successful because he knew that success would reflect back to him if he treated them well. And again, it's something you don't hear much in modern filmmaking. Most of the stuff you hear about people who are in high positions now, scumbags. Corman always seemed to be trying to get people to advance because he knew that he would advance with them. That is an ethos we could use more of. So I could not agree more. I think that's absolutely worth spotlighting.
So yeah, I think the opportunities for female talent, I think directing, writing, Corman was a pioneer, in my opinion. But to leave it on something funny, Joe, I'm going to share one of my favorite Roger Corman stories, and then we'll close out this episode. But this is from the film Death Sport, which it was technically a sequel, prequel, whatever you want to call it, to Death Race 2000. They're on like crazy motorcycles and stuff. There's explosions all over the movie. There's probably about 100 explosions in Death Sport.
It's a fun as hell movie. If you haven't seen it, it's a fun as hell movie.
Yeah, David Carradine wasted throughout the whole time. You can tell, but he's having fun. The stories of the behind-the-scenes stuff where he's bringing really high-quality weed and he wants to go hang out with the guys doing the explosions. And I thought, you might not want to be super high blowing up stuff, David. But anyways, there was a time on set where the director, his name escapes me because he really didn't direct the picture. I don't even know if his name was on it finally, but I think it was. The name escapes me, but he had to direct a scene, I believe, with Richard Lynch, and there was a nude dancing woman in this scene. And apparently this director hadn't been with a female in quite some time. We'll just leave it at that. So he felt he couldn't, direct this scene. So David Carradine stepped in and directed the scene. Well, apparently something happened where this director got mad at an actress or something like that, and David Carradine, who I'm sure was wasted at the time, went to his car and had a samurai sword in his car, and he was going to go kill this director for being mean to this actress and stuff. And I remember Roger Corman telling the story, and I love how Roger Corman talks, because he was just I was called by a production assistant to come in, and it appears David Carradine had a samurai sword in his car and was going after the director of the picture. So I rushed out to set in California, not far from where I was, and just calmed David down. And I thought, who has a samurai sword in their car, dude? But so he goes out to calm down wasted David Carradine, who's going to chop this guy in half with a samurai sword on the set of Death Sport. It's one of my favorite stories.
The director I think you're referring to is Nicholas Nikifor, if I'm pronouncing that correct.
Yes.
And yeah, that's there is this wonderful potential in making lower budget films because sometimes you just have people who are maybe on influences and substances they shouldn't be that are reacting badly to a maybe less than optimal situation. And you get stuff like this. Are you going to get this on a Spielberg film? Probably not. And I think that's a shame. I mean, maybe you will, but you'll never hear about it. So yeah, that's a wonderful story.
So, Joe, any closing thoughts? We're wrapping up this episode. You mentioned you got to just dive in and check something out. You know what I mean? If you go to Tubi, you go to Prime, you type in Corman, there's going to be 90,000 movies on there. Pick something. Yeah,
the wonderful part about Corman is he did something for everybody. I mean, you can find anything. He wasn't just horror. He wasn't just sci-fi. He did it all because he saw the potential in everything. And maybe that is the best thing to say about him based on what we got from his influence on the industry. He saw potential in everything and everybody he worked with. There was always the possibility they were going to make something that would be a hit. And I think that is sort of an optimistic way to approach filmmaking, and one that I don't think we have much anymore. Some people still do it, but it's not like Corman did it. And yeah, a wonderful, rich backlog of stuff to go through that you will probably find something that you'll enjoy, if not many things. and from somebody who is a giant of filmmaking and is a loss. You hear that said about a lot of people, and it's sometimes more true than others. This is absolutely somebody who it is a loss to not have this person involved in filmmaking and his influence and his stories and his kind of presence. So it's a shame, but it's a hell of a legacy, and he lived a long life. So good for him.
Amen, brother. Now, Joe, when our viewers want to say, hey, we want to learn more about Joe from Ozone Late Night, where can they go, Joe?
Very simple. You just have one address to go to, ozonenightmare.com, and you'll find 2 links there. One will take you to the podcast page, which we do a podcast every day of the working week, and then we have little bonus things here and there. And then you'll see a second link where you can go look at my artwork if you don't want to hear my voice anymore, which I totally understand. But then you can look at stuff that I draw, and you can follow my little art live streams and watch videos of me doing time-lapse illustrations and that kind of thing. So you can choose your own adventure, ozonenightmare.com.
ozonenightmare.com. Go to it, people. You will not regret it. For Joe, from Ozone Late Night, I'm writer and director Len Kapusinski of Killer Wolf Films. Thank you so much for watching. Again, chime in on YouTube. Chime in the comments, stories, suggestions. Me and Joe probably have not seen every single Roger Corman produced or directed or acted in thing out there, so tell us what you like. Tell us what we should watch. And we just gave you some material if you're not super familiar with it. So there you go. You're welcome. We will talk to you soon, everybody.